Good morning, boys and girls. We are going to read the next chapter of Charlotte's Web today. And since it's been a while since we've read Charlotte's Web at all, and since we are on chapter 6, I thought it would be a good idea for us to go back and do a kind of a recap. I don't know if you've ever heard that word before, but I've been watching a lot of Netflix lately, and sometimes before my favorite shows start, they offer you a recap of what's happened in the shows previously. So we know that all good readers get their minds in gear for reading before they start reading. So a good way to get your mind in gear to read something that you haven't read in a while is to kind of do a recap of what you have read up until this point. So we started Charlotte's Web a month or so ago, and we are on chapter 6. So just to kind of go back and recap, chapter 1 is called Before Breakfast, and if you remember in chapter 1, Fern was very upset because her father, Mr. Arable, was going to kill a runt pig that had just been born because he would probably not survive otherwise. So she called that a horrible injustice, and she begged her father not to kill Wilbur. So this picture I know that you guys thought was kind of funny is Avery, her brother, and he thought it was horribly unfair that he didn't get to take care of a pig as well, and he was shooting his BB gun and doing all kinds of things that boys do when they live on farms before the school bus arrived that day. So later on, Fern was able to, since he was the runt and he was going to be taking away from his mother, she was going to have to bottle feed him. So Fern thought this was the best thing ever, and I think this picture is really cute. Chapter 2 is called Wilbur, and in this chapter, Fern spends lots of time taking care of Wilbur on the farm and taking care of him and taking him for walks with the baby. And then at the end of this chapter, Mr. Arable decided that Wilbur was going to have to go live at Mr. Zuckerman's farm because they just didn't have room for him at their house anymore. So he went to live with Mr. Zuckerman. So chapter 3 is called Escape, and if you remember, this chapter describes where Wilbur lives in the pen next to the barn, and kind of the whole scenery was painted in this chapter. Wilbur, in the beginning, enjoys his days at Mr. Zuckerman's farm, but then he meets some new friends. He meets the goose, and he meets the sheep, and later on in that chapter, the goose convinces him to slip through an open part in the fence and run away. So that's why this chapter is called Escape. The goose was a really funny character because he says things like, he repeats himself, and he has a funny way of talking. So remember, he convinced Wilbur to break out and run away. So this is Lurvy finally catching Wilbur, and what a fiasco that was. So then chapter 4 is called Loneliness. Wilbur is so very lonely because Fern isn't coming to visit him as much, and he's super sad. So it's raining, and all he has to do all day is lay on top of his manure pile. So he finally settles down into a crying fit. And then he hears a voice. And the voice tells him, "Why are you so sad? I will be your friend." And remember, it's dark, and Wilbur can't really see what's going on, and he hears the voice, but he doesn't know where it's coming from, and that person assures him that I will see you in the morning. So chapter 5 is called Charlotte. This is where Wilbur meets Charlotte. And Charlotte is a gray spider that lives in the corner of the barn. And Wilbur is so excited to meet her because she's going to be his friend, and then he discovers that she is catching flies, wrapping them up in her silk, and sucking their blood, and Wilbur is not sure what he thinks about her eating flies and sucking their blood. So chapter 6 finally is called Summer Days. So I hope that was a good recap for you guys, and you are ready to listen to chapter 6, Summer Days. Please follow along as I read. The early summer days on a farm are the happiest and the fairest days of the year. Lilacs bloom and make the air sweet and then fade. Apple blossoms come up with the lilacs, and the bees visit around among the apple trees. The days grow warm and soft. School ends and the children have time to play and to fish for trouts in the brook. Avery often brought a trout home in his pocket, warm and stiff and ready to be fried for supper. Now that school was over, Fern visited the barn almost every day to sit quietly on her stool. The animals treated her as an equal. The sheep lay calmly at her feet. Around the 1st of July, the workhorses were hitched to the mowing machine, and Mr. Zuckerman climbed into the seat and drove into the field. All morning you could hear the rattle of the machine as it went round and round, while the tall grass fell down behind the cutter bar in long green swaths. Next day, if there was no thunder shower, all hands would help rake and pitch the load, and the hay would be hauled to the barn in the high hay wagon, with Fern and Avery riding at the top of the load. Then the hay would be hoisted, sweet and warm, into the big loft until the whole barn seemed like a wonderful bed of timothy and clover. It was fine to jump in and perfect to hide in, and sometimes Avery would find a little grass snake in the hay and would add it to the other things in his pocket. Early summer days are a jubilee time for birds, in the fields, around the house, in the barn, and in the woods, in the swamp, everywhere. Love and songs and nest and eggs. From the edge of the woods, the white-throated sparrow, which must come all the way from Boston, calls, "Oh, Peabody, Peabody, Peabody." On an apple bough, the phoebe teeters and wags its tail and says, "Phoebe, Phoebe." The song sparrow, who knows how brief and lovely life is, says, "Sweet, sweet, sweet interlude, sweet, sweet, sweet interlude." If you enter the barn, the swallows swoop down from their nest and scold, "Cheeky, cheeky," they say. This reminds me of all of the bird sounds I have been hearing outside of my house lately. We have some doves that like to visit our roof. In early summer, there are plenty of things for a child to eat and drink and suck and chew. Dandelion stems are full of milk. Clover heads are loaded with nectar. The Frigidaire is full of ice-cold drinks. A Frigidaire is a refrigerator. Everywhere you look is life. Even a little ball of spit on the weed stalk, if you poke it apart, has a green worm inside of it. And on the underside of the leaf of the potato vine are the bright orange eggs of the potato bug. It was on a day in early summer that the goose eggs hatched. This was an important event in the barn cellar. Fern was there, sitting on her stool, when it happened. Except for the goose herself, Charlotte was the first to know that the goslings had at last arrived. The goose knew a day in advance that they were coming. She could hear their weak voices calling from inside the egg. She knew that they were in a desperately cramped position inside the shell and were most anxious to break through and get out. So she sat quite still and talked less than usual. When the first gosling poked its gray-green head through the goose's feathers and looked around, Charlotte spied it and made the announcement. "I am sure," she said, "that every one of us here will be gratified to learn that after 4 weeks of unremitting effort and patience on the part of our friend the goose, she now has something to show for it. The goslings have arrived. May I offer my sincere congratulations?" "Thank you, thank you, thank you," said the goose, nodding and bowing shamelessly. "Thank you," said the gander. "Congratulations," shouted Wilbur. "How many goslings are there? I can only see one." "There are 7," said the goose. "Fine," said Charlotte. 7 is a lucky number." "Luck had nothing to do with this," said the goose. "It was good management and hard work." This is because she has sat on those eggs for a very long time, boys and girls. At this point, Templeton showed his nose from his hiding place under Wilbur's trough. He glanced at Fern, then crept cautiously toward the goose, keeping close to the wall. Everyone watched him, for he was not well liked, not trusted. "Look," he began in his sharp voice. You say you have 7 goslings. There are 8 eggs. What happened to the other egg? Why didn't it hatch?" "It's a dud, I guess," said the goose. "What are you going to do with it?" continued Templeton, his little round beady eyes fixed on the goose. You can have it, replied the goose. Roll it away and add it to that nasty collection of yours. Templeton had a habit of picking up unusual objects around the farm and storing them in his home. He saved everything. Certainly, said the gander. You may have the egg, but I'll tell you one thing, Templeton. If I ever catch you oking your ugly nose around our goslings, I'll give you the worst pounding a rat ever took. And the gander opened his strong wings and beat the air with them to show his power. He was strong and brave, but the truth is, both the goose and gander were worried about Templeton, and with good reason. The rat had no morals, no conscience, no scruples, no consideration, no decency, no milk of rodent kindness, no compunctions, no higher feeling, no friendliness, no anything. He would kill a gosling if he knew he could get away with it. The goose knew that. Everybody knew it. Have you guys ever heard someone called a rat? That's because that is a term meaning that they cannot be trusted. And this is why, because rats do things like this. They are sneaky and they take things and they can't be trusted, even in the animal kingdom. With her broad bill, the goose pushed the unhatched egg out of the nest, and the entire company watched in disgust while the rat rolled it away. Even Wilbur, who could eat almost anything, was appalled. Imagine wanting a junky old rotten egg, he muttered. A rat is a rat, said Charlotte. She laughed, a tinkling little laugh. But, my friends, if that ancient egg ever breaks, this barn will be untenable. That means that it will be made unable for anybody to live in there because it will smell so badly. What does that mean? Asked Wilbur. It means nobody will be able to live here on account of the smell. A rotten egg is a regular stink bomb. I won't break it, snarled Templeton. I know what I'm doing. I handle stuff like this all the time. He disappeared into his tunnel, pushing the goose egg in front of him. He pushed and nudged until he succeeded in rolling it into his lair under the trough. That afternoon, when the wind had died down and the barnyard was quiet and warm, the gray goose led her 7 goslings off the nest and out into the world. Mr. Zuckerman spied them when he came with Wilbur's supper. Well, hello there, he said, smiling all over. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 baby geese. Now, isn't that lovely? The next chapter is called Bad News, and we will read that tomorrow. Today, boys and girls, don't forget to go to your Google Classroom assignments and write a response to this chapter. Thank you for listening.